Hello, fellow Genshin slaves. If you haven't noticed, Sumeru is here. As such, there will be a lot of enriching content for everyone to experience, new areas to explore, new characters to meet, and an absolute feast of lore galore to gorge ourselves on. Seriously, I think Sumeru is going to be a gold mine of important information, and I, for one, cannot wait to dive in and smoke on some of that good old Sumeru Molly. But before all that, I wanted to share a few ideas that have been buzzing in my brain ever since the Sumeru livestream. Now, I did host a stream of my own to talk about said livestream, and you can check that out if you want to parse through 3 hours of rambling, but I'll be going over some of the topics I discussed there in this video, along with some additional thoughts. So, without further ado, let's begin, starting with a chat about our awesome new ally, Kale. Kale is one of the most anticipated characters in the game. So many people have wanted her to become playable since the early days of Genshin Impact, and because of the sheer amount of lore surrounding this girl, it's really not that hard to see why. She was a major character in the Genshin comic, starting out as a sickly child who was abducted by the Fatui and injected with Archon residue. The Archon residue fed off her anger, trauma, and her desire for vengeance against the Fatui, effectively making her a living weapon. But with the power of friendship from Amber and some help from Sino, Kale's Archon residue was sealed away. She overcame Barnabas, one of the Fatui's agents, and she was sent home to Sumeru with the dream of helping others. Fast forward a couple years, and now she's become a trainee forest ranger under the tutelage of the Foxy Fox Tignari. Though I can't help but wonder what her role will be in Sumeru's 3 Archon quests. I mean, it's clear we're gonna meet her very early on, and she'll likely be the one to guide us through the Avidia Forest, which is where she should be stationed, but I want to know the juicy stuff. I want to know why she had a vision of Dottore burning down this massive tree. We already know she has a connection to Dottore since, you know, he's the dude who ultimately spearheaded the Fatui's Archon residue research, so I'm not surprised per se that she had this vision. I just want to know how exactly she had it. The most notable example of the power of premonition that I can think of off the top of my head is from Sol Vindignir, the ancient civilization that lived on Dragonspine. Its princess saw visions of the future. She literally saw a vision of Durin, even though he didn't come into the picture until long after the princess and her people were gone. It is explicitly mentioned that the princess was born under the kingdom's silver white tree, which is codename for Irminsul tree, and the implication, or at least my assumption, is that the princess had her visions because of the Irminsul tree. Irminsul trees are a part of the ley lines, and they both house the data and memories of anything that's ever happened or lived into that. They possess the flow of time itself, so it's not hard to see why the princess would be able to take a peek into the future if she had some sort of connection to her Irminsul tree. But where does that leave Kale? Well, we now have confirmation that this gigantic tree in Sumeru isn't just any old tree. It is an Irminsul tree, and it was also confirmed that the consciousness of either Kusanali or Rukkhadevata, or both, it really wasn't clear, is tied to the tree. Makes sense that a so-called god of wisdom would have access to the world's very own fountain of wisdom, right? Which brings me to my point. What if it was Kusanali who sent Kale the premonition? If Kusanali is connected to this Irminsul tree, then she likely not only has access to its knowledge and memories, but also perhaps time itself. Maybe she can look at the past, or even the future. And if she can use the ley lines to do this, it's not that far-fetched to think she could give a vision of the future to someone who has a history with the dude who's gonna try and burn down the Irminsul tree. Not to mention Kale will also have a link to a certain traveler who's likely gonna try and stop Dottore. So Kale might very well be instrumental in whatever plan Kusanali might be cooking up to save her region. Also, this vision was delivered via a dream. Thanks to the Golden Apple Archipelago, we know that the Fatui were conducting experiments based on Kusanali's power, and those experiments revolved heavily around dreams, which implies Kusanali may have power over dreams, and she's able to speak to others via their minds from long distances like she did with the Traveler. So there you go. Kusanali might have given Kale a warning of what is to come because Kale will likely have some role to play in the Dottore Fatui storyline. I for one want to see Kale's Archon residue again. I mean, it seems like she has some measure of control over whether it will show up. During her demo, she says the line, "I'll never need to rely on their power again." Their being the Fatui, in my opinion, since they're the ones who injected her with Archon residue. The way she speaks implies that she could access the power if she wanted to. Maybe Dottore or the Fatui will enrage her so much she might slip enough for the seal to undo itself. Maybe they'll force the residue to emerge somehow. But she will overcome her literal inner demons with the power of friendship and sheer force of will, and honestly, I don't think the Archon residue will affect her the same way now that she possesses a vision of her own, since visions seem to provide a measure of protection against things like dead god juice. Well, whatever direction Kale's story takes, I can't wait to watch how our little bundle of anxiety and rage has bloomed into the young woman she is today. But hey, speaking of evil organizations, let's talk a little bit about the Abyss Order and the Academia. So I was actually surprised that the first villain arc we're getting in Sumeru is going to be revolving around the Abyss Order, at least partially. I was under the impression that the Fatui arc would come first, simply because of a Winter Night's Lazzo, but nope. Looks like the Abyss is taking the center stage first, and I'm kind of excited about it. The last time we saw the Abyss Order, they were experimenting with a way to cure themselves of their curse, which ended in absolute failure, so one can only wonder what they're actually trying to accomplish in Sumeru. Well, if they follow their track record, it's possible they're looking to make use of Sumeru's god. The Abyss Order have been trying to weaponize the power of the gods ever since the Archon quest, We Will Be Reunited. That's why they wanted the Eye of the First Field Teller and the defiled statue of the Seven, so they could make a mechanized Osial, which is weird. They even tried to sway Andrias to their side, but all of these plans were a complete flop. Dainsleif made off with the Eye of the First Field Teller, and Andrias refused to join them, but that doesn't mean the Abyss Order was out of options. They might want to make their own mechanized god again, but this time possibly with the power of the Greater Lord, Rukkhadevata. See, it's clear the Academia has separate factions, one that embraces Kusanali as Sumeru's god, and one that doesn't and still sees Rukkhadevata as their god. But as far as we know, Rukkhadevata has passed on, which the faction who still believes in her clearly does not want to accept. I mean, that one guy in the trailer says, "Mark my words, our god shall return. All will suffer retribution together." So, what if the Abyss Order brokered a deal with some of the sages? Offered them some dark and occult way to resurrect the god of the woods, which would totally be bogus, by the way. All the Abyss Order might want is a fragment of the deceased god's power. They might not even have an intention to resurrect her, if that's even possible. But honestly, even if the Abyss Order isn't directly working with the sages, that doesn't mean they aren't puppeteering anything. Given that it seems like Rukkhadevata's followers are very entrenched in their own beliefs, it isn't hard to imagine that the Abyss Order could easily manipulate them. I just keep thinking about the fact the Abyss Order can perfectly imitate humans, which means theoretically they could infiltrate the Academia if they really wanted to, without being detected, as if they were lizard people or something. Or they may not even need to do that, and the sages' own actions may benefit the Abyss Order anyway, regardless of meddling. Well, ignoring the sages, it's clear the Abyss Order have something to do with the reactivation of that giant ruin mech in the rainforest, since that is their old tech after all. Maybe they just wanted this cracked dark sphere orb thingy, which might have come from the ruin mech. The sphere might do the same thing they expected the Eye of the First Field Tiller to do, and maybe they'll combine it with a portion of Rukkhadevata's power. Who knows? But there is something else they might have had a hand in orchestrating, which brings me to our next topic, the Divine Knowledge Capsule. One of the first things I noticed about this capsule is that the green part looks a lot like amber, which is basically just fossilized tree resin. People around the world have used amber as gemstones and decorative objects since times of antiquity, and this capsule straight up looks like a type of gemstone. So again, it might actually just be amber, and it's knowledge that's fossilized inside instead of a bug or something. And if this capsule is made of amber, then that means it must have been derived from some type of tree, like, oh, you know, an Irminsul tree, for example. Divine knowledge capsules allegedly give a person divine knowledge, and Irminsul trees are basically hubs of knowledge and wisdom, and it just so happens, Sumeru's Irminsul tree is linked to the consciousness of one or both of the Dendro Archons. So maybe the capsule was made using something from Sumeru's Irminsul tree, like its resin, or maybe it's even the extracted seed of an Irminsul fruit. The capsule looks oddly similar to the shriveled seed you can find in the chasm, and it also looks like specter enemies whose appearances mimic the fruits of a tree in the sky, which is presumably Tevat's world tree, which is likely just one gigantic Irminsul tree. So what if the divine knowledge capsule is like a seed taken from one of the fruits of Sumeru's Irminsul tree, and therefore contains nuggets of wisdom, divine or otherwise, knowledge specifically related to the Dendro Archons, or knowledge the Dendro Archons might know. But you know what's really bothered me about this thing? The capsule starts off green, and then its color fades to red or crimson. Red and crimson are colors that have frequently been associated in the game with corruption or madness, things like that, so I can't help but wonder if this divine knowledge capsule was tampered with. I mean, we do see this guy who allegedly uses the divine knowledge capsule, and it makes him go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Even his Akasha terminal turns from green to red, similarly to how the divine knowledge capsule does. He also flickers between being a ruin machine and a person, which is extremely odd. So, to revisit my train of thought from earlier, what if the Abyss Order tampered with the divine knowledge capsule, and when this guy used it, he went cuckoo? What if they had this ruin machine replace the guy? Or maybe they just tampered with this guy's Akasha terminal, I don't know. But anyway, let's get on to the final topic, Kusanali, Rukkhadevata, and the Irminsul tree. So you may have noticed that in the Sumeru promotional video that was released a couple weeks ago that Nahida, who is probably Kusanali because let's be real, called herself the moon. She specifically said, "In the end, I'm just the moon. The real sun is already long gone." Now, a lot of people believe this is just a reference to Kusanali and Rukkhadevata. Kusanali is the moon, because the moon's light is really just light reflected from the sun, and the sun would obviously be Rukkhadevata, who for all we know is dead. Don't get me wrong, this analogy makes a lot of sense, but I definitely think there's more to Kusanali being the moon than meets the eye. If you've seen part 1.5 of my Sun and Moon series, then you know how I feel about Irminsul trees. That the Moon Sisters Arya, Sonnet, and Canon were inevitably tied to them. That they are guardians of the world Irminsul tree that likely is somewhere in the abyss, or are the trees themselves in some way. And that includes Istaroth, the god of time, because I believe she is one of the Moon Sisters. And if you've seen part 1.8 of my Sun and Moon series, then you'll know that I believe Tevat is actually a ginormous domain of consciousness where intangible things like dreams and wishes can actually become real, and the one in control of this domain is Istaroth. In light of all of this, I just gotta say that it's really freaking strange that Kusanali and or Rukkhadevata have their consciousnesses tied to an ancient Irminsul tree, that Kusanali literally may have power over dreams, and that Kusanali looks quite similar to Teresa Apocalypse from Honkai Impact, who is a clone of Colin Kaslana, and the Kaslana clan is constantly associated with the moon. You also know how I feel about Colin Kaslana and also Auto Apocalypse if you've seen part 1.5 of Sun and Moon. There's moon written all over Kusanali. Her calling herself the moon cannot just be a coincidence. But what does that mean for her, and Rukkhadevata for that matter? Well, they could be Seelie or Seelie-like. The Seelie were said to be beings of great wisdom. Kusanali and Rukkhadevata are each gods of wisdom, but likely with different perspectives on wisdom, and the Seelie also seem to have had connections with the Moon Sisters. Regardless of what she actually is, whether a Seelie or an offshoot of Rukkhadevata, I have a feeling we're gonna be getting some Seelie or Moon Sister lore very, very soon, even if it's just crumbs or heavily buried under symbolism and cryptic dialogue. Oh, and we might even get some Sustainer lore, because if you look closely at this last scene in the trailer of Aether standing in front of Sumeru's Irminsul tree, you can see what looks like cubes floating in the air. Maybe we'll get to see the moment Kusanali was born 500 years in the past and what happened to Rukkhadevata. Maybe we'll get to see snippets of the Cataclysm, since everything seems to be going to shit in Sumeru. Maybe time is getting all screwed up. Maybe we're seeing a ley line disorder. Who knows? But I, for one, cannot wait to find out. And that's all I've got for you for now. If you want to hear more speculations about Kusanali, Rukkhadevata, and the Akasha system, you can watch this video right here if you're interested. And you can also check out my Harbinger video to hear a little bit more on my thoughts concerning the Fatui's plans in Sumeru. But thanks for watching if you made it this far. I'll see you guys on the other side of the moon, and enjoy 3.0. Don't rush through it like I know some of you are going to. Take your f***ing time, you pieces of